Good morning. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Hank Hyatt, Senior Vice President for Economic Competitiveness at the Greenville Chamber. We host these Community Matters webinars every week to connect you with local, state, and national leaders. You can find past recordings as well as the upcoming Community Matters schedule at our website, www.greenvillechamber.org. Before we get going today, a couple of housekeeping matters. First, all attendees should be on mute with their cameras turned off, and we'll ask you to submit questions through the chat feature. We'll be monitoring that this morning and getting to as many of those as we possibly can. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to thank DC Blocks for their generous sponsorship of this program today. I'd like to invite now Ted Hasselt, who is the Senior Director of Business Development for DC Blocks, to say a few words and to introduce today's speaker. Ted.
Thank you so much, Hank. I appreciate you all inviting us, and we're honored to be sponsoring today's event and our speaker today. But I got a couple positive pieces of news I'd like to introduce about DC Blocks. We are doing a groundbreaking, and we start this week, but we're celebrating on April 1st with the Governor McMaster, Ambassador David Wilkins, Mayor Knox White will be there as well, and our friends at Brassfield and Gorey and Metromont, who are building our facility just off of 33 Global Drive in Greenville. So it's a Tier 3 SOC 2 compliant facility, and just best in class for the state of South Carolina and for clients looking for data center services around co-location, around business continuity, certainly network connectivity and cloud storage. So it'll withstand about 150-mile-an-hour winds. So that's a great place to park your data and be secure. The other piece of information that was really exciting for DC Blocks is we just secured $187 million in funding. And this will enable us to continue to build out data centers throughout the Southeast. Greenville is our 5th data center in combined with Atlanta, Birmingham, Chattanooga, and Huntsville. And we're looking at 16 different markets throughout the Southeast. So that's exciting for us. I'm a Greenville guy. I just got back from Denver, Colorado, and just happy to be here. It's a booming market, and great to be with DC Blocks and back in the community again. Carolina grad, and kids went to Greenville High, went to Christ School, so happy to be here. But the moment of the day is for our lead speaker, Mr. Jeff Korzenik. Jeff, it's a pleasure to be able to introduce you to the Greenville community. Jeff is the Chief Investment Strategist for Fifth Third Bank. Jeff is a regular on CNBC, Bloomberg, and Fox Business News, and his writings on economics and public policy have appeared in numerous national and regional publications. He was recently elected a member of the Council on Criminal Justice for his work on the intersection of justice system and labor markets. Jeff's new book, Untapped Talent: How Second Chance Hiring Works for Your Business and the Community, shares the business case and best practices for hiring people with criminal records. Jeff is a graduate of Princeton University and is a passionate supporter of cultural organizations, serving as trustee of the Harris Theater for Music and Dance in Chicago, as well as a member of the Board of Advisors of the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts. Welcome, Jeff, to this session of Greenville Chamber's Community Matters.
Thanks so much, Ted. I appreciate it, and thanks to everyone for allowing me to participate today. I've been a regular with Greenville Chamber. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk to this great business community. I'm going to start out talking a little bit about the setting the stage for our discussion. We often think in terms of hiring people with criminal records from the viewpoint of the business, and that is really the baseline. It's got to work for the business or it's not going to work at all. Or we talk about it from the good it does the community, and it does an awful lot of good. I want to set the stage by talking about all the good that second chance hiring does for all of us by aiding the American economy, and why it is in all of our interests, whether you're an employer, whether you're a returning citizen, it's in or just a member of the public, why it's in all our interests to encourage and find ways for second chance hiring people with criminal records to work better than it has. And it really starts out by talking about where growth and growth potential comes from for any economy. This is data from the Congressional Budget Office, and this is the past growth patterns in the US economy, as well as a future projection of growth. Potential growth of any economy comes from two and only two sources. The pillars of growth are how fast can you grow your workforce and how fast can you grow the productivity of your workforce. Productivity tends to come and goes. There's a lot of issues involved, technology, capital investment, and it tends to be average out over time. But the speed at which you can grow your workforce is largely a matter of demographics. And it's a matter of looking back 20 and 30 years and looking at some of the trends, birth trends in your economy. And the problem we have in the United States is that birth rates peaked cyclically in 1990. That was the peak of the millennial demographic boom. And since 1990, we've seen declining birth rates. And in fact, if you look at fertility rates, how many children is the average woman expected to have, we're not even replacing our own population. And that is something that immigration can't even completely solve, because this is a worldwide phenomenon. What this means is that our growth going forward is really in trouble. And you can see the demographic component, the workforce growth component of growth, that's the green bar in the chart you see in front of you. Blue bar is productivity. And if you even assume kind of a reversion back to more normal rates of productivity growth, that's the blue bar. Take a look on the right. That's our projected growth through 2028. You can see it's below 2%. Now, not every year. Years like this, where we've created a lot of slack, we're coming back from essentially a stopping of the US economy. We're going to have a booming growth next couple of quarters. But long term, our growth is constrained to less than 2% on average over the long term. And it's because that green bar, our contribution of workforce growth, has been so poor and continues to decline. You have to couple this with the other factors. So if you don't have as fast population growth, you better dig deeper into your existing population to get as many people who are willing and able to work in the workforce. Economists call this measurement labor force participation rate. And you can see this chart goes back to 1948, is updated through a couple months ago. You can see we've been largely declining since 2000. Some of this, of course, is those declining birth trends and the exit of the baby boomers from the workforce. But that only explains about half of it. We've had these really bad social issues that have gotten in the way of labor force participation rates. And what you can see in that sharp spike down to the right is that pandemic has made this even worse. We have a real problem growing our labor force, not just demographics, looking at the birth rates going back 25 years or so ago, but also conditions within our population. The pandemic has meant we have disrupted the labor force in very meaningful ways. We have a problem with rising long-term unemployment. People who've been out of work since, say, the start of the pandemic, if they have not regained employment, are increasingly likely to drop out of the labor force. We've had people who, until there's a complete eradication of this disease, which may be quite some time, are unwilling to go back to work. We've had a big loss of women from the workforce who've stayed home to take care of children who were unable to send them physically to school. All of this has pointed us in the direction of looking at labor force participation growth, which got even worse. To us, this means we have a looming labor shortage. It seems too early to talk about that, given all the people who are unemployed, but it's really not. And in fact, if you look at what's happened in terms of the labor force disruptions of the pandemic, you're also creating some skill mismatches. For example, I always point, many of you know, I have spent the last 11 years being based in Chicago. I'm not in Florida now, but in Chicago, the Macy's that was at the top of the Magnificent Mile, Michigan Avenue's big luxury shopping strip, is closing. So think of the employee who worked at a Macy's retail counter for 20 or 25 years. That person is now available for work, obviously very painful for the person involved, but is available for work. But where are jobs being created? In Chicago, it might be, say, the Amazon distribution warehouse in Joliet, Illinois. it's an hour away. The skill set of the person who worked at Macy's might not be the skill set needed for the job at Amazon. So when you have these mismatches, it tends to exacerbate labor problems. We think employers have to start paying attention now. But if you're not going to be able to get people who've been dislocated and have a skills mismatch in, which will somewhat happen, if you're likely to see increased dropping out of the labor force of people who have been long-term unemployed, where can you go to find engaged employees who can be with you for a long time and can be productive workers? We think one of the best opportunities lies in those who've been marginalized the labor force due to having a criminal record. Now, there are a lot of ways of measuring this. I've highlighted the green bar here is the measure we think is the most pertinent. It's a stunning number. 19 million Americans have a felony conviction on their record. 19 million. Now, over a million, somewhere between 1 and 2 million are currently imprisoned, but that leaves a lot of people who have paid their dues or are on probation or parole, but are available for work. Some are older, have aged out of the workforce, but there are many millions here who are available for work. Now, some are certainly employed, but many are unemployed. The unemployment rate of those who are looking for jobs for people with felony convictions is thought to be around 27%. That was pre-COVID. It's likely worse now. And that we also have to take into account that those who are employed are likely underemployed. They don't have the job mobility. You and I, if we see a job that can tap our talents more and pay us more to do so, have the ability to move to another firm. The barriers for people with criminal records and particularly felony convictions are so formidable that they often don't have that labor force mobility and are stuck in jobs that are well below their potential contribution to the US economy. We have to think of people who have been justice involved, including those with felony convictions, not as burdens on society, but as a potential resource. And the resource is probably greater than we think. There's a natural inclination to think of people with a felony conviction as bad people. Very often, these are actually mistakes of youth. Very often, they are far less serious. A friend of mine, a justice reform advocate, talks about what he calls the Hannibal Lecter effect. You think of someone with a felony conviction, and you always think of the worst possible crime. Here's the reality. Of those 19 million with felony convictions, fewer than half were convicted of a crime of such risk to public safety that they actually had to serve a prison term. Some did spend a little time in county jails. Many were just assigned probation or parole. So a felony conviction is not necessarily what you think. But this still begs the question, can they be good employees? And it turns out that done right, second chance hiring people with criminal records is a pathway not just to an adequate employee, but done right, actually gets an employee who is highly dedicated, highly engaged, and highly loyal. That's a recipe for low turnover costs and high productivity and thus high profitability. But there's a process for making this work, and it essentially involves having a way of determining who's ready to turn their life around. That usually means partnering with nonprofits, sometimes with government agencies, and then making sure that these employees who have various burdens, often it's nothing directly connected to a criminal record, but is more typically connected to past trauma or more probably a lifetime raised in deep poverty and lack of mentorship. If you can make up for those gaps, and there's an investment involved, you get a very high return on that investment. Again, all the large-scale studies, all the anecdotal evidence shows if you do it right, a process for finding who's ready to turn their life around, and a process for allowing those employees to thrive. Not every employee is perfect, of course, but on average, you get an employee who is highly engaged and with very low turnover costs. So this is doable. We see it. We think it's coming. But we also understand that it's not something that's really easy to turn on the switch. So this should not be, for those of you who are business decision makers in the audience, this should not be a binary decision. Either you jump in or you don't. It's something where you can test the waters along the way. And we call this, our terminology at Fifth Third Bank and in my book for taking these baby steps to explore this, we call bridging the box. And it starts with recognizing that there is truly such a thing as a low risk hire. Someone who has been, whether incarcerated or simply having a felony, but has been gainfully employed and productive with stable housing and transportation for, say, 5 years, that's just another employee. That's not someone who you need this support process for. It's just another employee. So why would you want to exclude them from your potential talent pool? So it starts with not automatically discarding any applicant who has a criminal record. Recognize they're very low risk hires. It also does require getting to know, and this comes about from looking at applicants' actual records and what comes back in background checks. Understand that not all felonies are equal. And very often you'll see that a lot of people were convicted of crimes in their youth. It is very common for someone to have a conviction of even a violent crime, but not be a violent person. This was someone maybe in a bar fight at youth and something got out of hand and now they spent 5 years or more behind bars. That's not necessarily a violent person today. Criminologists know people age out of crime. The worst crime generally peaks in teens and very, very early 20s. People grow, people change, particularly the male brain does mature later and people have better judgment of risk. So you really have to look at each individual case. It's important to connect with second chance pioneers. Every market has some companies that has done this successfully. Some have better processes than others, but meet those pioneers, see how they're doing it. Make sure you understand just how viable this is as a talent resource. It's key to connect with nonprofit partners. Not all nonprofits are the same. You need a nonprofit that is willing to tell you and be your referral partner, tell you who's ready, meet the needs you have for employees, and give you realistic feedback about what is reasonable to expect, how can they help you, how can they support your employees to make sure that they thrive. Even if you're not ready to have someone with a felony conviction among your workforce, make sure you're not unnecessarily excluding others from doing so. Check your vendor restrictions. Maybe in your facility, you don't want someone with a felony conviction, but what do you care about who mows the lawn, who does the landscaping, who does the electric work on your building? All of those kind of things are significant barriers to helping this along. And again, even if it's not for you or you're not ready to take the step, remember the macroeconomic benefit. We all prosper when we don't have people who are sidelined from the US economy. And then one final thing I like to remind employers about is you may have someone on your payroll who has contributed to the growth of your company where you don't know that they have a criminal record. And I think it's fair to consider offering amnesty to people who've been with you for 5 or 10 years, something tenure-based and contributing, or simply an employee in good standing today. I know of several employees who've been longtime career contributors to their companies who live in fear every day that their past criminal record, which wasn't uncovered in the days before all this electronic background check, or perhaps wasn't required of the firm they started with, but is now required of a successor firm. They live in fear that their career will be over, they'll be terminated automatically. That really doesn't strike me as fair, and I don't think it'll strike many employers as fair as well. So with that, that's kind of the pitch for why it's important to all of us, why we all prosper. What I hope you'll take is some practical steps of where we could start, where you could start exploring this. And at this point, I'd like to invite my friend Hank Hyatt to come back on and start a conversation.
Thanks, Jeff. Definitely appreciate your contributions today. You have been in Greenville at least once presenting to a workforce summit, and then we engaged you when we took our inter-community visit to Columbus a couple of years ago.
Right.
And so getting the word out about this issue is very important to the chamber. We've been involved around expungement efforts mainly, has had success at the state level, local level, over the past few years, and a little bit on the reentry space, but that's kind of it's a shift in focus a little bit. There's been some significant activity and support for reentry in our community. We've got, just in Greenville, we've got the Greenville Reentry Coalition. Soteria CDC is a strong partner with that group. And GSHRM, Greenville Society for Human Resource Management, has been involved a bit in this as well. And I want to thank them today for getting the word out about today's event. And then in Spartanburg, there's a great project called Jumpstart. And they're building a campus basically to help with reentry, housing, job training, that sort of thing. So there's interest, a lot of nonprofit partners. I don't know if the business community is as bought in as they could be. So that's why, again, we're very pleased to have you here. So let me start off kind of personally, if you don't mind. You're the chief investment economist officer for Fifth Third Bank. What got you into this space?
Well, it did start professionally. In 2013, 2014, we kept hearing from our customer base, the companies we bank. As many of you know, Fifth Third is for 170-ish, almost 170 years, has been the banker to the industrial heartland. So we're manufacturing as we are, and we support a lot of those companies. And we kept hearing that people couldn't find labor, even when the unemployment rate was still very high. And as we started to dive deeper, we realized a lot of that had to do with the opioid epidemic. And once you start realizing that these social issues are not just social issues, but are economic issues, it became evident that we had three major social issues which were present in the wake of the 08-09 financial crisis in ways wholly unlike anything we'd seen, at least since World War II. So we had the opioid epidemic, we had long-term unemployment, unlike anything we'd seen since the Great Depression, and then we had this incarceration recidivism issue. We have incarcerated people, particularly in the 1990s. It really ramped up quickly, unlike any of our past history. And so we had a lot of people, a huge percentage of our workforce, that 19 million or potential workforce, who had a felony conviction. And as I started diving into this, I started coming across companies that had cracked the code. They had developed a process for how do you bring people with criminal records in, and how can they be great employees. And some of these companies, like Nehemiah Manufacturing in Cincinnati, was one of the early ones I met. They incidentally, Nehemiah, it was written up about a year ago by Harvard Business School. It's the first first business school case study, let alone Harvard Business School case study of a second chance employer. It works so well for them. 130 of their 180 employees are second chance. And that's where they've chosen to focus. And I kept seeing these time and time again. But what was amazing to me is these companies had the same model of success, but they didn't know it. They didn't know each other. They weren't in the same geography. They didn't know it was a model, and that can be replicated. So I took it upon myself to start sharing that with our business customers as a potential solution to their labor shortages.
Very interesting. So for those businesses that may not be involved in this space, what does the process look like for hiring folks with criminal records? What is that?
There's an education part that goes on, and I think we should probably touch upon the objections first, because the first step is overcoming the objections. And the objections for the business community are reasonable. These are not crazy. There's a reason that this hasn't taken off. People fear things like safety and liability are kind of intertwined. Liability, one of the powerful aspects of expungement is that an employer cannot be held for negligent hiring liability for hiring someone with a record if you can't see the record. And so expungement has been a very powerful tool. In fact, there was a University of Michigan study that showed that people who had their records expunged gained about 25% in their earnings in the 2 years following expungement. It's a stunning number. It tells you how underemployed this population is, and how, it's still the same person, still the same skill set, but just removing that liability concern for employers really makes a difference. But the reality is that employers who want to pursue this should stress should know about liability management tools. It's if you go in and truly understand and can document your search process and your review process, that eliminates most of your liability risks. Many states have certificates of rehabilitation. They go under different names in every state. That's another tool. People who have who've shown self-improvement, say, even if they have a criminal record, who can't get the record expunged, can often get a certificate of rehabilitation showing that they are viewed by the courts as a rehabilitated person, and that eliminates the liability. Safety concerns, you get to control what crimes you will allow. A number of employers do start with no-go crimes, typically crimes against children. I mean, we have to talk about these ugly things. Those are records out there, but people who are I wouldn't necessarily exclude someone who is convicted of a violent crime, but you want a nonviolent person, and those are not always the same thing. It's really that careful review. So you have to recognize that people go down this route for all sorts of different reasons. They largely grow out of them and can be different people, but you need to document that you have seen some reason to believe and can document that there's a rationale that this is a person who is of no safety threat to your fellow employees. No one wants that. You have to guarantee a safe workplace, but it's someone who is ready for employment. The other concern is quality. And my friend Rob Perez started a bakery cafe in Lexington, Kentucky. And it was staffed almost entirely. I think 23 of the 24 employees are second chance, largely people who had drug addiction challenges. And he calls the halfway houses that are available, those are his staffing agencies. And he found that when he opened his restaurant, people wouldn't come. And I said, was it a safety concern? He said, no, it was a quality concern. People assumed second chance meant second rate. And what they ultimately found, and then they started getting, it's actually one of the highest Yelp ratings of any such organization. People found that the engagement and dedication of those employees who really appreciated the second chance they were given made them great employees who delivered a great product. And that's actually the typical case with following the second chance model of find the people ready, make sure you equip them to thrive, and you get, again, not second rate, you get actually first rate employee out of it. So those tend to be the biggest concerns. And then reputation risk is kind of trails in there too. I think reputation risk is going away as a concern. If you look today, not only most customers, but even many younger employees, particularly millennial employees, expect the companies that you do business with as a customer or that you're employed with as an employee, you expect them to be contributing to solving societal problems. And properly framed, second chance hiring is one of the biggest contributions you can make. So having a place staffed with people and known to be staffed with people who have criminal records, if you structure it right and position it right, I think is actually an asset. Some of you may, I don't know if it's available in the Greenville area, but Dave's Killer Bread brand puts right on their bread, their story of hiring people with records. Nehemiah Manufacturing produces consumer products. They have hags. If you think our products are great, you meet our people, and then it opens up and tells them stories. I think you'll see more and more of this in corporate America. But those are the objections and that you have to overcome. And then if I can go on, Hank, forgive me for answering a short question with a long-winded answer, but there's so much to talk about here. There is a process change that has to go on. And part of that process, of course, is not automatically discarding applicants with criminal records, but really giving them a fair chance at being considered and not a candidate of last resort. One of the challenges is that when you look at how these review committees are typically staffed, they're staffed, and I don't mean to criticize these people, it's very understandable. Their career incentives rarely are incented to say yes to a a hire with any kind of blemish, even if it's going to be a superior employee. So you need some leadership from the top of the house, and any company really has to say, this is something we want to do. We are looking to make sure we have tried this and given people a fair chance. Some companies, in my book, I use a case study of an Ohio manufacturer, JBM Packaging. JBM has a review committee, and it includes someone from the line of business, the director of, I think it was the director of manufacturing, to make sure that there's someone on the committee who feels the labor shortage and needs to make hires, and is kind of providing more balance and a more holistic view. One of the things, and I think it's terrific that the Greenville SHRM chapter has participated. SHRM has done a wonderful job in supporting this at the national level, and I'm sure at the Greenville level as well. They've created a new certificate, the Getting Talent Back to Work certificate, which covers some of these issues from the HR professional standpoint. It's actually free. If I were running a company, I think I would ask many of my HR professionals to go ahead and look at this certification. I don't think it's a terribly time-consuming commitment. And I think some of the great HR professionals out there can help lead the way on this effort.
Definitely. Well, we've got Laura Bogardus from SHRM on the call with us right now. They definitely do good work. Tell us a little bit, shifting gears slightly. You've spent the last, I don't know how many years focused on this issue, and again have taken all your learnings and distilled them down into second chance community. In April, next few weeks,
April
right?
13th. This is actually an advanced reader's copy, an earlier edit that went to reviewers. So it is real.
Very good. So I think there's a link pre-order the book that's in the chat. I've got my at least my Kindle edition's already been pre-ordered, so I'm looking forward to reading it in a couple of weeks. Tell us a little bit about the book itself, the process there. I'm curious that process as a fledgling author. How did that go?
Well, I have written many op-eds over the years, including on this topic, and the reason to write the book, because obviously I've got a pretty good day job at Fifth Third. My team leads the allocation of over $40 billion of investments on behalf of our clients and institutions. And I love that work. But I realized that there was a gap out there. Fifth Third has supported these panel discussions that I've led on second chance hiring, where we'll bring in a manufacturer or another employer who's had experience with this, a local nonprofit, maybe a government official. We'll try to kind of package it together. And what I found was that CEOs and other business leaders who were exposed to this amount of education wanted to move forward and would come up to me and say, let's get going. How do I do this? And what would happen was, without a better guide and a more detailed guide, the effort would just get kind of ground down by inertia or pushback. Maybe the legal counsel pushed back. Maybe it was an HR professional who had not participated in SHRM's Getting Talent Back to Work initiatives. But for whatever reason, it would die down. So I wrote this as very much, I think it's got a broader audience than just the business community. But I wrote this to solve this challenge, to make it a practical guide. It doesn't have every answer, but it points professionals, business executives in the direction that will get them the answers. And I think gives very realistic expectations about how well this can work, but also some of the challenges. And it's very nuts and bolts. Again, I mentioned this case study company, JBM Packaging. They ended up hiring a life coach, which has been transformational. You see this in some of these facilities. That's been one tool. And they were generous enough to share their coaching documents with me. So one of the appendices of the book is actually the coaching documents that a very successful second chance employer uses to work with this population and make sure that they can thrive.
Very good. So it really is a nuts and bolts book that really can add some value to CEO level, buying into the vision, to the implementation level as well.
Right, and I think that there's other things people need to understand, right? This is a very complex issue. There aren't easy solutions, and you have to know, how did people get to this point? Who's really behind bars? What are the demographics of this population? How do you identify a low risk applicant? And that gets involved in the criminal justice system. One of the chapters that I thought was really important was a chapter on reentry, the barriers that people exiting prison face in trying to rebuild their life. And when properly understood, and I got the assistance of a leader in the criminal justice workforce reentry space in Philadelphia, who himself spent 5 years in federal prison, and he kind of walks through what it's like to come out. You know, how you're given gate money, hardly any money. You have no transportation. You may have lost all your documentation. Your driver's license may have expired. You come out some of the victim restitution debt, unpaid fines, and how all the odds are stacked against you. That's important for business owners to understand and for business executives to understand, because you realize that the applicant who has come out of prison but is now knocking figuratively on your door, applying for a job, they've probably a long way and have already overcome a lot of obstacles, getting identification, getting transportation, getting stable housing, maybe learning how to use a computer for the first time in their life, or never having seen a smartphone. A lot of facilities don't allow internet or have computing devices, whether a laptop computer or even a phone. These just aren't available. And if someone who's been away for, say, 10 years has very limited computer knowledge, and to have that to the point where they can actually apply, have gotten a resume, have gotten housing, have gotten transportation all figured out, that person is making a big statement about their level of determination and ultimately their character. I never condone crime of the past. That's not mine to judge. Society judges them. We have a system for judging them. We have a penalty they pay. But then once they have paid that penalty, I think you can look at the person anew and say, you know, is this a different person? Have they provided evidence that they're a person of determination and understanding just the process they have to go through and all the hurdles they have to overcome is one way of understanding who that person is today.
The barriers they face when they come out are almost insurmountable.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard folks being bused to the local QT gas station, just dropped off, and again, no forms of ID, barely any money, and so again, they're facing tremendous odds. So for them to show up at your door ready to work says something about them, and that's
absolutely. And I don't pretend that this is the solution for every person who's been touched by the justice system. Using rough numbers, I think they have people who are exiting the prison gate, a third are ready for employment right away. You know, they have stable housing, family support, a level of education. A third can be made ready. And that's where you really lean on these nonprofit agencies, the workforce development agencies, to provide that kind of support. Or the project you mentioned in Spartanburg, you know, those are really great ways of making people ready and providing coaching. And then a third, you know, maybe will never be made ready. I don't know why that is, you know, that we can all come to our own conclusions, whether there's such a thing as a bad person or whether it's been trauma or addiction. All of these things make some people truly unemployable. What I'm seeking to do with the book and with this research is let's find the people who are ready, make sure that they have an opportunity to contribute to employers and to their communities. Let's work on the people who can be made ready, freeing up those resources, and then we can focus those other resources on making sure the public safety is prioritized. It's often said that, you know, it used to be said, I should clarify, that it was either about, you know, you're either hard on crime or soft on crime. That's the wrong way to look at it. I think it's important to be in favor of public safety. And part of driving public safety is making sure that people who can contribute to society, who can be employed, who can become good citizens, making sure they have the opportunity to do so rather than revert back to a life that would risk public safety.
having stable employment long-term is definitely a factor in public safety.
It's the term I use is foundational. You know, it is the core of rehabilitation.
I've got a couple of comments I want to ask you, Jeff, if you don't mind, just to maybe react to these. One says, people may need to account for parole appointments, but can't get the flexibility to attend those obligations. This is just one aspect of losing talent due to inflexible work shifts. What can we do to improve flexibility, especially in manufacturing? And are you seeing that with some of your case studies?
Absolutely. My friend John Kufos, who's a nationally recognized justice reformer and someone who spent about 18 months behind bars for a felony, was a lawyer. He shares the distinction of being the only lawyer who argued a case before the New Jersey State Supreme Court while out on bail, and then got his victory verdict while isn't on behalf of a client. John said to me, if I were employer, one of my first calls would be to the local chief probation and parole officer and start developing some understandings, because very often probation and parole officers will work with employers, not universally, but many of them will. And if they understand the employer's needs, can work around them. If not, sometimes they're willing to come to the facility as opposed to, and particularly if you have several employees who are on probation or parole, it kind of makes it easy for the probation and parole officers, because it's just one stop to have several meetings. Make sure there's a private place at the facility to have those meetings. It does require work. Not every probation and parole officer is going to be good about it, but some of them are great about it and actually turn into referral sources. But it's a very real challenge. It's just part of the complexity and part of the investment to make this work.
And I'll say, just my limited experience in Greenville, the probation and parole folks have been very willing to engage and work with community partners, what have you. It makes their job easier to have those good relationships. I would urge everybody to reach out and get to know them.
I'll say in South Carolina also, your attorney general was on a panel that I moderated, and it's interesting. It speaks to the bipartisan nature of this. It was a panel of the attorneys general of North and South Carolina, Democrat and Republican, and both of them were on the same page of the importance of reentry and rehabilitation. And I think that sets a very good tone for the entire law enforcement community in the state.
Gotcha. Let me shift gears just slightly. The Chamber is well known for its business advocacy programs or public policy efforts, and you spend some time in your book talking about needed reforms there. Can you touch on that subject for us? That's, again, an area I think would have more interest in engaging in.
Sure. I focus on not the whole breadth of reform. My big picture view is that when we get the business community to the point that they see people who are justice involved wherever they are in the timeline of that process as their future workforce, we'll get better policies. So part of this is through great advocacy with chambers like Greenville that are leading the way on smart justice reforms. So ways to eliminate that risk or perceived risk of negligent hiring liability, like expungement, and other kind of clean slate record clearing programs are very good. It's got to be done consistent with public safety, of course. But there are others. Bail reform is something that's gotten national recognition. People who tends to disproportionately impact the poor, they're arrested for even a misdemeanor, can't post bail, and are stuck incarcerated sometimes for months on end. Think of how that disrupts someone's job performance, and they end up losing their job, careers getting derailed over sometimes a very, very minor offense that wouldn't even require a jail or prison term, but it's pre-trial detention. Now, some people are arrested for crimes of such risk to public safety, they need to be detained and not bail. But cash bail probably should go away, or at least be used far more selectively. It doesn't mean you'll let anyone out. It means you have to do a risk assessment on whether this person is likely to recommit a crime, how likely they are to have characteristics of people who might commit crimes, but someone who's, has a family, is working. I mean, generally they pose very little flight risk and very little risk to public safety. Maybe it was just a moment of stupidity that they were arrested for, and it doesn't make sense to derail their career. So those are big ones. There's also other kinds of things called collateral consequences. These are punishments essentially that come with a criminal record, and they can impact housing. Big one is licensing. In many states, having a felony conviction can preclude you from having even a barber's license. Now, if you were Sweeney Todd and killed someone, in the barber's chair, I get it. But in many cases, it's unrelated to the crime. So reviews of licensing restrictions, reducing those. And then there's a whole host of reforms that should revolve around people leaving prison more ready for employment, which means some basic computer literacy skills. It means making sure they have licensing and identification. All of those things are important reforms. And my perspective on reforms, and I have a chapter on this in the book, is to focus on what interferes with employment, and can those barriers be reduced?
I think that's something we would definitely have an interest in. Our vision is a globally competitive upstate economy where businesses succeed and people prosper. And removing those barriers will help people prosper.
Absolutely.
Want to remind folks, if you have any questions, please submit them in the chats. One other comment I've gotten thus far is one of the biggest problems we create is continuing to apply the past performance predicts future performance in a blanket fashion without accounting for efforts some people sincerely approve.
Yeah.
So
and that's an important one. And part of this education process, and again, I tried to make the book one-stop shopping, so you don't read 20 different books, so you can get it. And this is something I had to educate myself on, is neurological development. The shortcut here is the young male brain is stupid. And as someone who's not so old, I can't remember what it was like. You tend to make, and it's not exclusively a male disease, but it's disproportionately so. The male brain on average doesn't mature until 25, 26, sometimes 27. And before that period, you have different time horizons, immediate gratification, maybe how you evaluate risk. All these things tend to lead people in the wrong direction. It's also important to realize that we've gotten to the point in our criminal justice system that we have so overburdened specific communities with incarceration that you've disrupted a whole generation of mentorship. I don't know about the listeners, the viewers today, but I learned how to work hard, how to dress appropriately, how to navigate conflict at work or accept constructive criticism, because my parents were able to provide this insight and role model. In particular, my dad was a super hardworking guy and provided a role model for me. And also we had, between my parents and family friends, this big kind of mentor network I could lean upon if I didn't understand how to navigate something. If you look, the aftermath of our criminal justice system for the last couple of decades is that we've gotten to the ugly truth is 1 in 3 Black men in America has a felony conviction. Again, fewer than half had to serve a prison term. But if you think about the way that that's disrupted work, you've lost in many communities that are where this has a really strong impact, you've lost this kind of experience of going to work, how you do it, what it means. And that lack of mentorship is really important. So sometimes people who acted inappropriately truly didn't know better. They didn't have the role models. And so it is, yes, to that comment, yes, people do turn around, but it's sometimes they really have a first chance, and being shown the broader world and shown different ways to live can be incredibly powerful.
100% agree. Kind of a nuts and bolt question here. And while we love our attorney friends, love our insurance friends, This one comment says, oftentimes our commercial insurance policies require a criminal background check. How can we cover them when our insurance policies do not support us? Are people finding success gaining flexibility with insurance carriers?
Yes, and it's interesting. People in the same state, in the same industry say, yeah, my insurance, won't allow me to do it. And the other will say, oh yeah, it's not a problem. So I've got to believe it is an area where I don't have a tremendous amount of in-depth knowledge, but I can tell you there are a lot of employers across industries who have been able to find insurers who will cover this. There's also a federal bonding program that covers, it doesn't, it's a short-term issue to allow you to test out employees. Some people come by these employees also through staffing agencies and things like that. So you get essentially a free look. So it's an issue. It seems to be one that employers with some effort can get around. I think it may also crack open. There was legislation passed last year, actually 2019, I believe, that kicks in at the end of this year. If you're doing business with the federal government, with the exception of some very small carved out exceptions like defense work and things like that, you cannot ask about a criminal record in advance. So it becomes a ban the box legislation. And, ban the box has had mixed success. I think we should get to the point where employers don't care whether the box is checked or not. They're going to look at each individual as an individual. But the growth of ban the box, ultimately, if employers are smart, will say, well, I can't ask. So instead of trying to avoid people and going through the process, maybe I need to figure out how we can incorporate people with criminal records in our workforce. And I think a labor force shortage will force that. I think that'll ultimately force, if insurers start losing business because of this, they will start changing their policies. So I'm in favor of getting the money aligned with what works well for businesses in our community. And I think that the vendors will fall into place. One thing I should add, and I didn't bring out, is one thing is different this year or in the past year than all my years of dealing with that. And that's our new Federal Reserve Bank's, what they're calling their new monetary policy framework. I don't think everyone has fully grasped. It seems like this obscure point, Federal Reserve Bank policy, who cares? Interest rates go up, they go down. The Fed is doing something completely different. It's the first time they've talked like this in their 100+ year history. The Fed it's generally been spoken of as, oh, the Fed's going to keep rates lower for longer. That's only part of the story. The real story, and the one that I think will impact the business community the most, is the Fed, which traditionally has been said to be the chaperone that takes away the punch bowl just as the party is getting started. Meaning when labor markets get tight, economies start heating up, they cool it off. They raise interest rates, cool it off. This is a Fed that is not only not going to take away the punch bowl, they're going to keep the punch bowl on the table and spike it. They want hot labor markets in the name of what the Fed is terming broad and inclusive employment. And you can't have broad and inclusive employment if you're not employing those with a criminal record. And I referenced before, if you look at the plight of the Black community, how are diversity and inclusion efforts going to work if you're excluding people with criminal records when 1 in 3 Black men in America has a felony conviction? We need to couple the very well-intentioned diversity and inclusion efforts with a second chance process that gives people an opportunity to thrive.
Wow. Okay. That could be a mic drop there. Broad and inclusive employment. I like that concept. That's fantastic.
The Fed has never used that term since 1913 when they were created.
Wow. We do have a couple of other comments, and then we probably need to wrap up. We're getting close to 11 o'clock, actually. Just point of note here is that Greenville Tech last year began a program to work with motivated individuals coming out of incarceration with their quick jobs programs for high demand industry and careers. So they've had a lot of folks have success even through the pandemic. So again, kudos to what Greenville Tech is doing. They're a strong partner in a lot of ways in the community to provide that training. The last comment, someone asked if we could provide the contact information at Greenville Tech and other organizations to help place second chance individuals. And we'll make sure everyone here on the call gets contact for Greenville Tech, Jumpstart, Reentry Coalition, and other folks. And that is the last of the comments. Jeff?
I'll just throw out, as you're dealing with nonprofit partners, make sure they understand your needs. They're used to client models. The people they serve are their clients. They also have to recognize that you as an employer are their customer, and that you need people who are ready for employment, a realistic assessment of their abilities and their gaps. That's one of the issues, that these are true partnerships. And of course, if this has become a source for you of great employees, you want to find ways to support those organizations as well.
It definitely takes a village to get this job done. Any final comments from your side, Jeff?
No, I thank everyone. I'll mention that if you are interested in the book, jeffkorzenik.com. The book will be released April 13th, but pre-orders are welcome. If you believe in this, as I do, as kind of a mission as well and a cause, pre-orders are important. They send a signal to booksellers and to reviewers that this is an important topic. So if you're going to buy it eventually, I'd ask that you consider a pre-order as well. We've got a great book reader from who's been the book reader for over 400 books, who's got the audiobook version. And of course, it's available on Kindle as well as paperback. We also have a project going on. I'll just mention it now because we're about to announce it publicly, probably next week. And this is not necessarily relevant to the audience, but we have a philanthropist in the Philadelphia area who is funding sending 500 books to prison. And in fact, the book was originally a hardcover. That's what I contracted for. It's more prestigious, I guess. But hardcovers often aren't allowed in prison, so we changed it to a soft cover. And we think it's important for your future employees who happen to be in prison now to understand the expectations of business owners, and also to have that message of hope. They need to know that there is a future, because they will spend their time away more productively if they feel they have a future. So just love to talk about that. Keep an eye out for that project as well.
That's fantastic, Jeff. Thank you very much. I want to thank all of our attendees today. I'd like to thank DC Blocks, Ted Hasselt for their sponsorship. And of course, thank you, Jeff, for being here. A recording will be shared on the Greenville Chamber's website and sent to attendees along with the survey. It's important that you complete the survey so we understand what kind of content we can have for our future Community Matters webinars. So please share your feedback with us. And this is part of an ongoing series. The next Community Matters will be Tuesday, April 13th, and we'll be speaking with Toby Stansel, who is CEO of the Cargo Agency, about marketing to small businesses. So let's all do our part, care for the community, and have a great week, everyone. Thank you.